It's Thursday night, and we're back with another great show. I'm joined by my regular compatriot, my man.
Barrington Miller.
Thank you. And tonight we have a special guest. We have Jay Rosenthal. We're going to jump right into the guest segment this week of Aftermarket. And we're going to talk about a little industry called psychedelics right after the beat.
Do you know my name?
All right. Well, I promised that we were going to get right into the interview portion this week because, frankly, we called up Jay the other night. And maybe let me take a step back, Barrington, just to describe why we want to talk to Jay, because I often still have to answer to people in my world, like my parents, my family, my friends, as to exactly what it is that I do at the Canadian Securities Exchange. And, a lot of people know the work that we've done in cannabis. And what we'll soon learn is that a lot of people know Jay because of his work in cannabis. But we also want to know about the new hot industry and share this information about psychedelics. And Barrington, I know that you've got a big event coming up corporately in the psychedelic space that we're going to talk about today. But we're going to use Jay as a sounding board because he's been doing a lot of great work in the space. So maybe if I can just introduce Jay, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. And we are looking forward to having you on Aftermarket.
Well, I am honored to be here. I love spending time with you guys, whether it's this way or whether it's, someday we'll get back to the times we spend on the road at shows, but that may be a ways off. We might have to get really used to this for a while.
I'm already used to it. Are you used to it, Barrington?
Yeah, I'm actually just look at my studio. Before this, I was on with Mika Yu because we don't use last names on the show for whatever reason, and we had a nice informal dinner chat with 13 other people.
Nice.
And I said, "Hey, listen, I gotta go because I'm going to be on with Jay. I can use Jay's because he's on the show, Jay Rosenthal."
Yes,
and
JR.
I was complaining about my disappointment with Jay's beard because the last time I saw him, it was gone. And then I log in and I see this magnificent. I thought it was old footage.
It was lush.
It was lush. It looks great. So,
is that
Jay,
what we're
Jay
talking
had a
about?
COVID beard. Jay, you had a COVID beard before COVID beards were cool.
I did.
You reversed and flipped the script, and you went with the clean cut. I'm in a bomb shelter look, and now you're back with the COVID beard.
I am. This beard, though, we can talk about this all night. I love talking about the beard. But my barber, who I will give a plug to, JP the Barber on St. Clarence in Bloordale, he's an amazing barber, and I've sent a number of people there, and he's the best. It's called B-Side Barber. And he's cautious and is not doing beards right now. So this is what it's going to look like, but perhaps longer every time we talk.
Well, no, that's awesome. And I like you said, we could probably spend the entire show talking about your beard. But a little bit of background: Jay's been very, very friendly with the CSE and to CSE clients as well as the cannabis industry as a whole. The last time we really, really hung out was during MJ Biz, which seems like eons ago, but it was just a quick 10 months in the past. But we're going through a change at the CSE. Jay himself is going through a change, and that's not just to be associated with one sector and one industry. And I guess the real crossroads at this show is the crossroads of cannabis moving into psychedelics. And I'm being really, really cautious when I say that because the two are not the same. The industries are not the same. The starting points are
Drugs.
Cannabis did a lot of heavy lifting for psychedelics. It paved the way. It got the investors comfortable with a very, very high risk, high reward. It was a bit of the Wild West. It's illegal, and it was federally legal, still federally legal in the US. Cannabis is, but psychedelics is not legal in Canada. And with that, I think we are at the crossroads. Cannabis will go left and psychedelics will go right, and enter Jay Rosenthal. Jay, what is going on with psychedelics?
So I think that's a good intro, because I think many people sort of put them together as like these things that are happening, sort of opening up a society as it relates to drugs, right?
Yeah.
And cannabis had a path. Let's just take the Canadian path, right? It was pushed by patients. They sued. They got access to medicine they needed. That opened the process to be have your own grow, allocate your grow, commercial growers. There was a lot of steps in between, but then legalization, then retail, there was a process by which it went. I think many people are looking at on the Canadian front, like, oh, we have patients now that are Health Canada approved to actually receive psilocybin as sort of end of life care or palliative care. Great. And that is a super important step. That is not, that may seem like there's an analogy to what happened in cannabis, patients receiving their medicine. I just don't, it's not going to lead, in my view, to a legalization of psychedelics writ large. And I think it's also important within psychedelics to talk about what we're talking about, right? There is psilocybin sort of mushrooms. There is LSD. There is MDMA. There is ketamine. Like, there is a series of drugs, some of which are illegal and sort of the way you describe them, Barrett, and some of them are in use across the board or in some specific cases. And some are being, in proper drug trials, certainly in the States. So I think there are parallels, and there are very many people who like cannabis who've used psychedelics. And so there is sort of that sort of kinship there. But I think if you're looking at the industries overall, that they will follow a similar path. I think your point that they take a different path is right on. And I think the path that cannabis took is probably more analogous maybe to like how maybe alcohol sort of went through prohibition and then non-prohibition. And then there was an industry that developed. Not a lot of people now are using sort of alcohol for medicine, but like, I think that's an analogy. But I think on the psychedelic side, it's much more like a drug discovery industry, right? Like, and you guys talk to a lot of investors, and I think there are investors now in the psychedelic space that see, oh, cannabis 2.0, like, we're going to get in on this because it's going to be high risk, high reward. But I think the more serious players, or the real opportunity, is not in there's going to be a run up of stocks. It's much more about, there are people, and you're much more versed in this than I am. There are people that invest in drug discovery areas and understand the long horizon of that, and understand that it is, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. Those take time. And even when they do take time and it's proven, it's not as if the drug comes to market and everybody, goes gangbusters for that. Like, right. This is a long process. And I think the serious players that sort of we're talking about or looking at or thinking about, that is the game plan that they have. It is always exciting to go public. It is always exciting when new sectors enter the sort of public financial markets, but that does not equate necessarily to, a year from now or 2 years from now or some date, looking back like October 18th or October 17th, 2018, there's going to be this big market point. Like, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. I'll make a better analog to what the public markets response to this industry is. And it is blockchain, right? Where everyone thought, boom, now's the time, pile your money in, take these things public. This is going to be a tipping point, a movement, a time and place. And everyone raised money and then realized, oh my God, there's a lot of work here and a lot of stuff to figure out. And whereas cannabis had a bit more of a defined path, though there were a lot of, and still are, regulatory thresholds that has to get through. I mean, I look at a company today as we're taping, TrueLeave, and thank you for sharing this, Barrington, 100 million raised to expand their operation in the US. I mean, these businesses are establishing footprint, growing, scaling, and where things are at with psychedelics, just like where blockchain was, a lot of great proof of concepts, a lot of great theory, but still a lot of proving ground to be trodden. So we all agree that these drugs can change lives, they can change our minds, they can do a lot of great stuff, but we're years away, as far as I can tell, from going into a clinic and having a reliable mescaline treatment or buying a psilocybin product that we know is going to have a regulated and moderated and consistent effect on my mental space. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the ones you mentioned, right? I'm not like got a controlled mescaline experience would be really something. But we're much closer because we're into it with ketamine, for example, right? There's a ketamine clinic in downtown Toronto.
Sorry, and that's what I meant.
Yeah,
I apologize.
Yeah. But I mean, shit, if you want to take a 12-hour jam on mescaline, you make sure you tape the whole thing. That would be something. But again, but it also, I've been struck that, we've had conversations both on Business Cannabis side and on the Report on Psychedelics side, which is another media property that we run or are partners on. And the idea that there are doctors that are much more open to psychedelics writ large than they ever have been to cannabis. And I think it's because what I described before is that there is going to be a proper drug discovery roadmap and things that people follow. And we know this from cannabis, like doctors like specific paths to use, right? Yep. They like dosage, they like effect, they like knowing exactly what's going to happen. They know that it's been tested. And we know that this actually holds back medical cannabis, and that it's not, you can't say to a doctor can't say, take this thing this many times a day and hear what we think the results are going to be. It's just not there yet, maybe ever, because the interaction is just so varied, especially sort of in the dry flower.
And doctors are scared to death of malpractice suits. They're scared to death of repercussions from their college. It's an issue.
Yeah.
I'm jumping in here because I know that the amount of data and the amount of research that's been done on psilocybin and psychedelics in the United States since the 1950s is volumes, it's tombs, it's massive amounts. And if we want to get some real proper research, we need to head to Israel, because that's where they have the most. They are the leaders when it comes to research. And so it's actually a little curious as to the hesitation when we have the information about this. As well, I also want to pick Jay's brain a bit about who's coming to you. What type of companies, what type of businesses and or people are coming to report on psychedelics?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we launched Q1 2020, so not that long ago, and almost as soon as we did, the world sort of closed in on itself, and it wasn't sort of out networking for sure, right? Which we actually had a game plan that was similar to Business of Cannabis, where we produce insightful content. We do it on a regular basis. We marry that up with events. So we sort of build the networking component and use those events to create content and more connections. But what we have seen and what we've done, and it's led, of course, we're sort of partners in it, but Alex Blumenstein, formerly of Leaf Forward, which is a networking and sort of accelerator in the cannabis space.
Alex was at the dinner I was at.
Yeah, I mean, great. Just a really thoughtful guy, yes. And who knows this sector and certainly knows cannabis too. So part of what it is it does remind me of 2017 cannabis days, where you can call
back when.
It does, right? Like you could call people at the biggest, quote unquote, biggest companies in the space, most respected companies in the space, and they will give you time. Right, whether it's Compass or Atai or Field Trip or any of it, right? Maps, like all of the people in the space, they will give you time because this is what they're doing now, right? But again, it's not as if that cohort of companies that some of them going public, some of them doing trials, like the work that's being done, and others doing sort of political advocacy stuff, which we should absolutely talk about. Like it's not as if they're ramping up for mass production like cannabis was, which it becomes really busy. Like research is not necessarily, building 1 million square foot facility to grow mushrooms. Like that's just not how the industry is working. And while it is capital intensive, the capital intensive nature is to do trials, right? And do proper drug discovery and do research, which is not the same as raising capital to do infrastructure, right? Like you look at the companies in Canada on the cannabis side, they raised capital to build facilities. The best way to raise more capital was to build more facilities. And we entered a space now where there's oversupply, right? It was just this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. That's not, I don't think, the way it's going to go in psychedelics, because again, it's a drug discovery method. And I actually think this, what I want to sort of touch on as well, is the politics of it. And we see in Washington, D.C., we see in Oregon, we see in some cities like Denver and Santa Cruz and Oakland, sort of the decriminalization of psilocybin specifically, or really the non-enforcement of, non-existent laws. Like it's sort of a hands-off approach. While that is interesting and it drives conversation, I'm not sure that is related in many ways to a company that wants to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 discovery, because it's not super related. They're not really intersecting in real ways, other than to move the ball forward on the conversation, in society, which is always helpful. But again, like, I don't think you're going to see a massive wave of decrim efforts around the country, this country or other ones, leading to like everybody being able to access, mushrooms at a dispensary. Like I think that it's a different kind of substance, a different kind of drug. And, they are interesting and parallel and drive conversation, but I'm not sure, that I'm not sure that has a massive impact on companies going public and what they can raise and sort of how they'll deal with investors.
Yeah. So on a couple points there. So one is the motivation for politicians to ease regulation. So I think about the opioid crisis and mental health, issues that are occurring in our world today. And are you at least thinking those are motivators for politicians to look at easing and encouraging this industry to grow? Because when you look at what's out there now, it's not doing its job. It's not working. There's a lot of sick people in North America, at least that we know of, that are not accessing the right therapies for their issues. Do you think this is one of the big issues that we're going to start seeing influence change?
Maybe. I mean, there are not. I used to work in politics in the States, on Capitol Hill and in California. And God bless the people I worked for, but politicians in general, or sort of regulators especially, are so cautious. Like, I don't think you will find someone saying, we think mushrooms is the cure to mental illness, or, MDMA. Like, I just don't think you'll see that. Just like they don't sort of stand up and raise the flag or wave the flag about, potential cures for diabetes. Like, it's just not sort of where they go in those cities that are, the Denver, the Santa Cruz, the Oaklands. They have a special place in sort of left-leaning hearts. And, I think what you're more likely to see is that, not related to psychedelics, but people saying, look, the opioid crisis is real and we need to rethink how we approach this. We see a bunch of that in Vancouver, right? And in some other sort of West Coast US and Canadian cities, that is about, what we're doing now does not work. Therefore, we need a different approach, or we're going to have more and more people dying on the street. That is true. Sort of the harm reduction, the safe injection site type of thing, like that, I think is much easier in some ways, even though it's really difficult for elected officials to say this is going to be something we know, because we are seeing now it's not working. I think it's different on psychedelics per se. I think as more research gets done, I think you'll see, real health advocates saying, if this has real potential to help, PTSD or treatment resistant depression, like let's discover what that is and use it. Right. And I think you will see that, but I don't think you will see many people saying, let's invest public money, right, government money into research into mushrooms. I think we are a long way off from that. Maybe I'm wrong, and I think we are. It's not. It's like,
you're probably right.
Like, we know
there were similar voices during cannabis, though.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to keep going back to it, but in the early days when applications started trickling in, I remember sitting there going, no way, this is nuts, forget it.
And I think the one thing that cannabis did have going for it is that to produce it at scale is a pretty juicy economic development proposition for some communities, right? I think,
and
so I just don't think, I mean, there are major facilities even around sort of the GTA that produce pharmaceuticals. They're huge job creators too, but we are a long ways from these things being produced at scale that actually creates tons of jobs, like an economic development thing. So there's lots of, well, this is the whole point. There is lots of conversation to have, which is why we launched Report on Psychedelics, because we wanted to inform, well, I mean, first and foremost, a cannabis industry that was curious. We wanted to inform people who were thinking about putting money in, sort of big dollars or small dollars, into these companies. I think we really wanted to to highlight the point that there is a decriminalization effort and there is a drug discovery effort, basically two broad things, and maybe a third thing like tourism or wellness, wellness tourism, right? Those are different things, and it's hard to be across all of those things because drug discovery is a real rigorous process that is well established, and people don't fuck around. Like the FDA doesn't fuck around. And so like all these things are interesting from a society perspective, from a business perspective. And the topic is interesting because psychedelics are interesting, just in general. And I think anybody who's ever used them, bad or good experience or somewhere in the middle, interesting is not something you can debate.
No.
You care to talk, James?
I'll leave it at that. Okay, so let me shift a little bit. So microdosing is something I'm actually fascinated by, because look, I love the concept of like the movie Limitless, where you can take a pill, expand your mind. We've always been told that, we're using like a portion of our brain power. And yeah, I mean, look, is there some formulation or elixir, whether it's psilocybin based or something else, that helps you? And again, I'm going to go throw another cannabis analog in here, like CBD, where, it's kind of like a background thing, but it does give you, a little bit of an enhancement to your acuity or your mindset, whatever. It's a pick me up. And I've always been attracted to that concept. Maybe I got caught up a bit in the Silicon Valley narrative around, it's a bit of a life hack or a mind hack or whatever. Is that all BS? Or do you feel like microdosing has, some real validity to it? And I'm saying this from someone who has a very open mind about it. And I also don't want to be in conflict with some of our clients, but I'm just very open-minded about it. I want to know what you think.
Yeah. Look, I take the word for people who are much smarter than me. That's generally my, I have no choice but that, because almost everybody is. But I like harken back to a conversation I had with Blaine Pearson and I, my co-founder of Business of Cannabis, with Ronan Levy, field trip. And this was, it must have been I'm trying to think if I was wearing boots. I think it must have been January in Toronto. And the way he describes both what happens physiologically, what happens medically, the impact of that microdose over time, like and he, he comes from he has a cannabis background too. So, right. He speaks of it very eloquently, but he believes, and others do too, that this has much more potential, long-term, as both wellness, medical, whatever you want to call it, that the microdosing does have major impacts, and not necessarily only right when you take it, right? Like the impacts could be longer term. So like, I think that is probably true. At the same time, these are, as is cannabis, like can have serious impacts, beneficial and otherwise. And so I think, I don't want to be here prescribing microdoses of mushrooms that you get right online right now. But I also think there will be a time where you will be able to do that. You will be able to get a prescription for it under medical supervision. And I think people have been longing for that type of wellness for a long time. Spiritual and mental health and, right. All those things are super important. And one of the biggest drivers of all kinds of illness, so I think, I mean, right. There's hope, but I also think there's benefit. And I believe that that unlike cannabis, we may actually get some trials that actually prove it.
Interesting. So you think this will be medically? You don't see a world where you can go to a vendor, a retail store, and get a microdose of mushroom.
Not the ones we're talking about. I mean, you can do everything you described. You can basically do now. Like, I don't think I'm like anybody can do a search Toronto psilocybin and you can get something delivered to your door tomorrow.
No.
But I wouldn't. But that's the way people have been doing it for 50, 60 years, or forever, I guess, is the other way. So like I don't see that on the horizon. At the same time, like there. This is going to sound awful towards the medical profession. You could get a prescription for almost anything, right? Like that's not a secret. That's how many people get, into the sort of opioids, right? I also want to touch on one other thing we haven't touched about, but I'd be remiss if we didn't. And that is there is a long history, generations, thousands of years using some of these substances for religious purposes, right? And I think there was actually several episodes of the show Billions, which I assume you guys watch or know about. That was basically just about what we're talking about, where, these hedge fund guys were trying to line up a guru, basically, who'd been doing this in the woods in Oregon or Washington, I think, like taking people on ayahuasca trips, right? I think it was, right. And like, there is something to that. And interesting, I think, is that, there's, psychedelic assisted or psychedelic aided psychotherapy, right? Or therapy, which, there is a direct parallel or similar scenario for gurus or shamans that walk people through, these type of trips, right? And I think actually Field Trip came up with an app, right, to get you through one of these trips. Like these are modern versions of ancient approaches to this type of medicine. And sometimes those are the ones with the deepest insights, right? And the ones that, people have found most effective. So like there is so much happening and so much to discuss, which is why we started reporting psychedelics. Not that there are easy answers or a clear path, but maybe because there aren't clear answers and no clear path is what makes it most juicy to us.
Couple points. One, I think there is a need. I think people want and need that spiritual guidance, and want that spiritual connection. Bringing the woods to the big city. That's what it is. And I'm not taking away from either side. Where I have a hesitation is somebody who isn't licensed, prescribed. Like there are clinics, and I know there are in the States, where there is not one person who has any real type of experience, background, degree, something that would make me feel comfortable as an insurer. That's, and we haven't even touched on the insurance.
Yeah.
The insurance side, because we know where insurance is going with the cannabis industry. You're paying a lot more and you're getting a lot less, and it's just shrinking and getting smaller. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
To that exact point, I didn't do the interview, but Alex did, I think either today or it's happening this week, reporting psychedelics for an interview podcast we're doing with Mert Guler of PRL Insurance. And I think the point is that
Mert is awesome, by the way.
He is awesome. And he's obviously steeped in cannabis and often talks about with us and others that it's, the industry, like insurance is expensive now. That's true. Insurance in cannabis is also expensive. Insurance in cannabis, given the past sort of 2-year track record, especially around D&O insurance, is like astronomical. Yeah. He said that's like nothing compared to now with psychedelics, which you get, right? Like, insurance, it's based on risk. It's based on, decades of knowledge and data and, actuarials. There's basically none of that, right? So new industries plus insurance are not particularly, they don't love each other. And I think that's,
well, and you can collateralize the cannabis businesses a lot of the time through all this things you mentioned, the farming, the infrastructure,
licenses.
Yeah. And psychedelics a little more like running an experiment.
Yeah. And this is why I say, like experiment and it's new and it has the word psychedelics attached to it. But even, even insurance, I don't even know what it's like to insure what you're doing on a, phase 3 clinical trial, like, or earlier phases, right? Like, what does that even look like? I honestly don't know. I assume there's a market for it, but you're basically in many cases giving people something you have a theory about how the reaction is going to
It's
go.
human guinea pigs, yeah, and they can sue you if you do something wrong to their body, for sure.
Well,
I would
you can
assume,
sign,
or they sign liability
you
waivers.
sign
Absolutely,
liability waivers.
yeah.
True.
Yeah. Barrington knows because in college he was a regular. No,
I know because I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 8 months, 9 months.
Sounds like
long
an
enough.
expert.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode.
Okay, we'll save that one.
Well, what are you, I mean, let me ask you guys questions. Like, what are you guys seeing? Cause you obviously have, a number of listed companies. There's a number of listed companies on other exchanges. Compass going public on NASDAQ. Like
Yep.
that hasn't happened, but it's going to be a big deal. Like what are you seeing, and maybe give ranges as opposed to actual company names, but like, from, companies that have sort of really thoughtful approaches to it to ones that are like not winging it. That's not what I mean, but like, what
There's
are
a
you guys
wave.
doing?
There's a wave, and some companies will catch a wave. And this is not at all a negative thing, because we really support people who take, the approach that they may be early and they're using the public markets to fund that concept very early. That's okay. And when you can raise capital at a fairly low cost using a public market like CSE, that this industry and what these guys are trying to do, these people, could be a great fit and a start to something great. You have to caution against those who are raising a lot of money. You talk about Compass and raising big dollars. You start getting institutions involved. Their expectations are going to be a lot higher than a retail investor that bought a board lot at 20 cents a share. So I guess all I'm trying to say to your question there, Jay, is that we are seeing a lot of early stage. We're seeing a lot of, we have a formulation, we have a concept. This is something we want to test. It's going to take time. That we see a lot of that. And then Barrington, maybe you can describe sort of what we're seeing, overseas with companies like Trip.
We're seeing companies that are operating in jurisdictions that are legal, more legal, on the verge of becoming legal, and not only operating there, but also exploring opportunities in other international jurisdictions, having established a framework in one country and sort of exporting that framework, not the product, but the idea and the concept, not the product. and so now it's again, like James said, the early stage is revenue. So now as an investor, you want, one idea is that you want to invest in companies that can get to revenue or close to revenue. And if there is a company who is operating in a jurisdiction where they're able to do that or very, very close to, that's attractive. And again, they have first mover advantage because now they're not just researching, they're not just phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They are selling product and getting revenue. They are a business. And so that's very, very attractive. And the cost of capital to start that business is nowhere near as intensive as other industries that are green, that have those words C, letter C and an S. Mm-hmm. And again, that's attractive. My money that I'm going to invest in, if I'm going to take, I don't know, whatever, $20,000, and I put that into a company that was just starting in cannabis versus one that's on the verge of getting revenues in psychedelics, and that is the only one, I don't know, maybe you see that your 20,000 could go a lot further, or not.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's buyer beware.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're still getting, as you can tell, we're still getting a feel for it. I mean, we're not seeing as many companies as we did with cannabis. Like I said, the wave is not as big. And I think that's partially because investors, and this is again, that cannabis analog, we can't avoid it. I think they're starting to have learned a few things, or at least responding to what they learned with cannabis 1.0 and 2.0, which was, there's got to be some meat in the bones here. Like, I can't go to my client and then put them into this deal. And then 6 months later, they're out of cash because they didn't fund their research enough, or they didn't have partners coming on board, or whatever. Like
the FDA took longer.
Yeah, I think people are a little wiser now about just catching like drugs market skyrocket going up. Like, no, it's not about that. And so I think this is a little more intelligent, a little more methodical, but still a lot of risk. I mean, we get that. That's
now I'm interviewing you guys. That's good. Can we shift for a second? Because I think one of the things we are talking about, not on the psychedelic side, but although there are election issues in the States that will affect psychedelics. But I think more broadly on the cannabis side, right? There is, the federal election, I think, will have a major impact. Federal and state elections will have a major impact on what's happening in the States. And some of those companies are already crushing it and, are positioning to crush more in the States. And I guess how are your listed companies sort of thinking about that or gearing up for that? Or is there anything to gear up for? I think you mentioned Trulieve. Like I just saw right before we recorded, they acquired 2 companies in Pennsylvania, I think.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
They're now operating in five states.
Yeah.
So with the elections, sorry, James,
No, you're the expert on this.
No, not just the expert, just a guy.
Actually, James, also in New Jersey, your ex-home state. Barrington, sorry, not James.
Yeah. I was like James went to
Princeton.
Spent time in Jersey.
James, I like Bruce Springsteen. I don't know where
James didn't go to Princeton.
So what? We had a very actually, I thought it was a good interview with Jason Paltrowitz from.
Oh wait, my hat. I'm just adjusting my hat here.
Yeah, I'm just fixing my sweater.
Okay. There you go.
And he was reflecting on the upcoming elections, and he commented that usually you take a look over the last 4 years, and if you are further ahead than you were 4 years ago, then it was usually a good run. And if you're not, then it was usually a bad run. That doesn't seem to be the same criteria being used for this upcoming election. More importantly, people just want to know. They just want to know. It's less about Republican, Democrat, some of the characters that are involved, but they just want to know. And it's not really about November. It's more like about January. And once the market, once the States, once North America, once the world has an idea, just one way or the other, because at this point, with everything that's gone on in 2020, just some information. That's all that people want, and we'll go from there. So that's his thought. I thought it was pretty good.
Stability.
So I'm not going to, knowledge is power. So I'm not going to stray from that.
Yeah, for having a 4-year, just knowing what you can expect, or at least the guy who's going to be making the decisions for the country, is always useful to know who that's going to be the next 4 years. And I think, Jay, one thing you've noticed too, and I think one thing that COVID slowed down but is now starting to prove out, is that the cannabis industry was still very early days in consolidation. There was a lot of, and look, it's a chicken and egg concept right now because of the state infrastructure in the US and regulation. How many states do you want to sew up as a national brand without the ability to move your scale across border, right? And I think that's where people are trying to measure and carefully grow and intelligently grow without knowing, as Barrington alluded to, what that certainty or time frame is for federal legalization. So, Trulieve will buy, and other companies will do deals and continue to consolidate. But at some point, it kind of, to me, based on our discussions with these CEOs, it only kind of makes sense if they can start moving the product across borders and consolidating brands and being better integrated. That seems to be the dream.
Yeah, it's also interesting. We do a weekly spot on Business of Cannabis with a partner of ours, BDSA, which is a consumer insights company. They're
Mhm.
based in Boulder, but this week we did a deep dive into California, and to hear what California is experiencing, and they're just further ahead on lots of things than Canada is. But they're predicting pretty similar size markets, even in 2025, like 6 point something billion-dollar markets. Like, but what they have also had some brand sort of not dominance, but like there's 5 leading brands of edibles that have 55% of the market share. Like that's a lot.
Yeah.
As well, flower of course is king, but lots of retailers have their own flower because they can procure it, right? Like it is, when we talk about market to market and sort of federalization, like if every state is going to implement it different, like we do sort of here in Canada, like it just is a different world state to state. And of course there are trends to see, and every state is slightly different in sort of their uses, but like, it is so early days. And you just look at their projections, BDSA, about where we're going every year, like 25% growth every year. And I think we've spent a lot of time lamenting, like, oh shit,
Buddy,
cannabis in Canada, we're getting screwed, they're getting killed. Like, but even here, like 25% growth of an industry
in
over,
Canada, it's grown. It had a 22% growth during COVID.
yeah,
During a global pandemic, it had a 22% growth.
yeah. And other states and the states did too, except for Nevada, which is heavily, tourism, but also they closed the stores. Like they had to figure out delivery. Like there's a Hebrew word, balagan. It was a disaster.
Balagan.
Balagan's a good word.
Oh, I'm that's going to make another appearance.
But it's true. But like every state that has adult use,
Yeah.
Huge sales coming down, like normalizing now, but it really was a spike because people were sort of stockpiling, just like I have a 50-pound bag of rice above my head right now. But like it's one of those things people don't want to do without. But it is like as we talked about sort of psychedelics and what the future may hold sort of in the near and sort of a little bit more time horizon. But on cannabis, like I am really bullish on what the sector is going to look like year over year.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as long as, it is a tough business to be in, but I think even you see the big guys in Canada almost retooling, like they're taking the body blows and then retooling and figuring out what the future holds. And I think when they look at the same numbers and say, this is what the market's like, they're going to have a big chunk of that market, even if they're taking body blows and getting killed right now. Like it's going to be an interesting and probably fruitful ride for some of them. And I think we'll continue to see new brands, new products, new retailers. I think you'll see bad retailers fall by the wayside and new retailers sort of take the spots. It's going to be a wild, but also growing.
We're not going to see this. What we're seeing today is not the way it's looking in 3 to 5.
Let me give you a very personal anecdote about this. Myself, since cannabis has been legalized in Canada, it's been over 2 years. I have not walked into a store, whether it's a dispensary or anything else, or online, and bought a cannabis product. Okay. And I'm the perfect customer for a cannabis company. I'm a perfect customer. And I haven't felt compelled, whether it's because of brand or just use case or whatever. I just haven't done it. And there's a lot of things. I spent a few dollars on a lot of other things, not drug related, but clearly, but you know what I mean? So until I feel like I've gotten to that point, I feel like the industry hasn't met me in the middle yet. And that to me is just, and not to like personalize it too much. I'm not everybody. Okay. I'm one of 35 million people in Canada, but I feel like if I'm the perfect customer and I haven't yet felt compelled to spend even $5 to $10 on this stuff, work is probably still yet to be done.
Which I think is a positive. I mean, it's bad that you haven't been in, but I think it's a positive because there's room to grow. I also think in Ontario specifically, until really recently, there's basically been 0 stores. I mean, for it's very like unless
Ontario has been brutal.
It is, but now it's not like I live in the West End and like we have stores bursting, you know, and it does change, and it does change the dynamic. And I see in our neighborhood who's going in, and it's everybody. And we only have one store open right now, and lots of signs about coming. But like, it really is. It does change the dynamic if you see it on a regular basis, which is, by the way, what many of these companies were saying for a very long time. I remember Hexo put out something early days of like the industry taking a shit in 2019. It said like, we are severely impacted by the stores not opening in Ontario. And then I think people are like, well, that sounds like a cop out. But then you look at the average daily sales of these stores, and like every store that opens has an industry wide impact almost, right? Just the numbers of like the dollar amounts just being sold.
Jay, we could spend an entire podcast. In fact, if you want to check out some of our earlier podcasts, I was railing against the Ontario cannabis stores and its decision to, once phase 3 opens, to claw back curbside and online delivery. Like, Jay, I don't want to go there.
And it
deep breaths.
And it's interesting because this week we had a program, Business of Cannabis. We had a networking education event online, obviously focused on Quebec, which if you don't like the Ontario cannabis store, you're really going to hate what goes on in Quebec. But Quebec sells a lot of cannabis, a lot of it, and they are opening stores, and people doing business there are doing, like, people who are selling to the government they're doing really well because it's one buyer, one seller, one buyer, one seller. All the product we can send, they will sell it. And it's a totally different model. But I think your point is like the blended model where the government is the wholesaler and the government is the online retailer. And it's not working. And it's like, it's not working for the Ontario cannabis store real well. I mean, they're making lots of money, but it's definitely not working for the retailers because they're just getting screwed both ways. They're getting screwed on the price they pay.
The person that's getting screwed is the customer.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry, you want to squeeze the black market? Open more stores.
Yeah.
I think that's what Home Depot does.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get to the wrap. Okay. Jay, we somehow we couldn't avoid the cannabis conversation.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Oh, we didn't want it.
No, this is guys, we can't avoid it. We can't avoid it. And I think it's interesting, all the things we talked about with psychedelics and how we're still trying to frame what it is, the opportunity. We know it's not going anywhere, but we know that there's still a lot of proving points to play out here in the next few months and years. So anyways, I know you're not going anywhere, Jay. CSE and Barrington and myself are not going anywhere. We're here to support innovation, entrepreneurship. So I appreciate your thoughts and insight. I know you're one of the experts, and I don't know, Bear, anything else you want to sign off with or say to Jay before?
I want Jay, if I want to reach you, if I want to reach Business of Cannabis, if I want to reach Report on Psychedelics, where do I go?
Businessofcannabis.ca, reportonpsychedelics.com. That's where everything, but we're also on, Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find us. We have podcasts, we have video series, we have newsletters. We actually launched a Business of Cannabis new newsletter. It actually launched today. This morning, we brought over Jameson Burkow, who is a former reporter for the Globe and Mail, and then with the Canopy Rivers. He's going to be writing a subscription newsletter for us, but the first 4 weeks, starting today, are free. So you go to our website, sign up, and you'll get it, which is a big step for us just on the Business of Cannabis front, because we'll have a proper news editor-in-chief of that newsletter. And the first story was about the entourage effect of cannabis. And is it really a thing? And it's a really good read.
Awesome. Well, okay. So in the next show, we will dig into that deeper. Really appreciate it, Jay. Love what you're doing. Good on you to adapt to the new environment. And we love the content you guys are putting out. So we can't wait to have you back on the show. And again, if you're watching, please, if you like this content, first of all, subscribe, because we keep bringing it every week.
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button, man.
Smash the like button.
Liking this, if you don't like Barrington or me, you definitely like Jay. You gotta like the button, and then go visit him. We'll put it in the show notes where to access that content. Do your own education, get informed, do your homework. A lot of this is high risk, so be smart before you invest. or at least be educated. And without further ado, wish you a good evening. Thank you for watching Aftermarket. And that's it for me. I'm James, and I'm with
Barron Miller.
Have a wonderful night.
Bye, guys.